Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us for the third and final day of the ninth annual San Antonio Book Festival. And this is one of the last sessions of the festival, but we want to remind you to shop at our No Borders bookstore, support independent booksellers, and buy the two great books of the two great writers we were about to talk with, as well as the other writers who are guests of this festival. My name is Cary Clack, and I'm a columnist and editorial writer for the San Antonio Express News, and welcome to our panel discussion on what we collect, expert essayists. Essays can be repertorial, confessional, literary, or reflective, but they are always inclusive in the topics explored and always reveal something about the writer's personality, likes, and dislikes. The best essayists, Enrich and Stephen G Kellman, are two of our greatest essayists. Make us think, make us feel, and make us always pay attention to what they have to say and write. We're going to just have a discussion today. It's going to be like a little workshop on essay writing, and I hope to learn as much as anyone out there listening. But we're going to start. I'm going to do introductions of and I have a cat I'm trying to keep out of the screen. On Rascal. It's going to be interesting. I'm going to introduce Rick, and Rick is going to read part of some of an essay, and then I'm going to do a full introduction of Stephen, and he's going to do the same, and then after that we are going to have a discussion. Rick Bass is a Texas native now living in Montana, recognized by numerous Pushcart Prizes and O. Henry Awards, as well as the Texas Institute of Letters. Bass continues to publish celebrated fiction and nonfiction about the natural world and humans' place in it. His most recent book is titled Fortunate Son, Essays from the Lone Star State. The essays in Fortunate Son encompass a Texas that is both lost and found, past and present. The stories reach from Galveston Bay to the hillside country outside Austin, and from Houston in the 1960s to today. They are bound together by a deep love and a keen eye for the land and its people, and by an appreciation for what is given, a ruefulness for what is lost, and a commitment to save what can be saved. Rick Bass.
Thank you, Cary, Steve, and the whole festival folks for putting this together. I'm at the fastest internet in Montana, which is outside this park from Butte in the center of the state. Apologies if there is a disruption of transmission, and I'm traveling with a companion, a pound puppy that we picked up this week, and I'm taking her to my daughter, and I don't know how she'll do, but so far she's pretty good. But yes, I empathize with your cat.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Fortunate Son essay collection, decades of writing about Texas, and happy to visit about it afterward, but at Cary's invitation, I'll read a section from one of the chapters. And I think this chapter I want to read is called Writing in Stone. It's a profile of a great mentor of mine, the Texas writer and national treasure, John Graves, who lived up in Glen Rose forever with his family. I'll cut in on the middle back half of the essay. And if there's somebody who doesn't know of John Graves, I'm really happy for you. Because you'll be in for a treat when you hunt him up. This essays are, I guess essay, yeah, we'll get into that later if it is or isn't an essay, story, whatever, covers attending his 90th birthday party, which he was not too happy about. The next day, early on the morning after the big party, some of us go out to his ranch to hang out more, hungry for more of his company. All John wants to do in his 91st year is what he has always done: live on his farm, get up and work in the morning, tinker with things a little, then read and go to bed, only to get up the next day and do it again. When his two daughters were growing up and decided, despite their affection for hardscrabble, to go to school in town, Fort Worth, Jane rented an apartment there, while John spent as much time as possible at home in the country, back and forth in the seam between work and family, and between the land and family. Immediately after breakfast, he makes his break from the social setting of well-wishing that has invaded his routine and bolts straight for his office, a stone room with a screened porch. The office, filled with books, of course, floor to ceiling, is, like most of his house, not air-conditioned. The only concession he's made to the heat is to have a little fan blowing the outside air in through the open door, stirring the neat papers on his desk slightly. On this one day, only this one day, instead of writing, choosing and arranging words, he gives the day up to us and receives visitors yet again as we filter in all morning long to sit with him in his stone office and look around and catch up on things and to tell him what he and his work have meant to us. There cannot be that much time left now. All men are mortal. We know it, and yet we forget or ignore it, each of us, almost every day. But for us, he will give up one of those days and suffer the rain of our ceaseless praise. We take turns going into his hallowed office to sit with him. When my opportunity arises, I summon an old dilemma, one I've discussed with him many times before, and which he, perhaps better than anyone, can understand. I still don't have it figured out, I tell him. It feels ridiculous at 52, middle-aged, yet roughly half his age, to still be groping. Literature or family, books or life. The glory of making a stone wall is so incredibly satisfying. Incomparable, really, every bit as good as making a nice story or an essay or even finishing a book. The epigraph to John's 2005 memoir, Myself and Strangers, is a quote from Juan Ramon Jimenez's Maximus, Busquemos la gran alegría del haber hecho. Let us seek the great happiness of having done. There are certain times when his grenade-struck left eye fixes on you through random drift, and you swear he can see with it, and better and deeper than back when it was sighted. Here in his office, visiting about what matters, this is one of those times. He says nothing about my dilemma, as if to say, it's your path, not mine. You have to figure it out yourself. But he smiles, watching me edge closer to the place I try to resist, that books do matter, much as we sometimes would like to tell ourselves they are but a hobby. He points to a row of old books on a lower shelf, gifts from a passing-through Frenchman who'd been towing a trailer full of expensive horses and had broken down near Glen Rose, maybe 50 years ago. The traveler had spent the day conversing with John about art and literature while they worked on the trailer, then sent John the books as a thank you gift. It was the perfect day, he might be telling me, with his anecdote, the perfect mix of art and labor. The sun beating down in August, a little welding torch, a lot of impatient horse whinnying, a lot of impassioned talk as they worked, and a little wine later that night. The days that make a life. Do not be afraid to turn away from books, I think he is saying. Remember to live life, even as he is pointing me to them, asking, have you read this? Have you read that? Did you ever read so-and-so? Do your best, he is telling me. Do what you have to do. Literature is your master. Serve it, but try to be a free man, too. Go back and forth between the two worlds. Eventually, always, one of them will claim you. But there is great virtue in the trying, the passing back and forth. From such conflict and struggles, the soul is forged. I suppose what I want to say about the largely invisible John Graves is that even a man of such unrelenting dedication to his craft and to the rhythmic routines of life in the country can be a bit of a paradox. Too much unknown to general readers, and yet hugely celebrated by some, and, most important, by those who matter most. It is not an insignificant thing to me to know that a man can live out in the country for most of his life, can marry a beautiful and elegant woman, and live happily thereafter, and that they can raise two daughters who, perhaps in part because of, or perhaps in part in spite of, a deeply rural upbringing, turned out perfectly fine, more than fine, and make books the way he wants to, and to make a living at it, even if just barely sometimes, through thick and thin, across the decades, across major parts of 2 centuries. His might even be the kind of life people would envy if only they knew about him.
Thank you, Rick. Rick, you didn't read this part of it. There's at the beginning of the essay, there's a funny story you write about the time you interviewed John Graves at the Texas Book Festival. I wonder if you could just, I didn't know you were gonna read this particular essay, but I wanted to ask you about that particular story.
Yeah, I don't know whose idea it was to have me interview John, and I don't know. It was my responsibility. I said yes, so I had to be responsible for it, but it didn't turn out so good. He doesn't talk much, and I'm not really much of an interviewer. I'm a better listener than I am questioner. And I mean, we had like an hour to fill, and we're there in the legislative chambers or whatever, and there's like, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people waiting to hear this incredible interview. And so I said, I think my first question was, so John, you live in the country, and kind of, made it into a question mark at the end. And he didn't say anything. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. And, many seconds went past. He looked over at the clock on the wall, and he looked over at me, and then he said, yes. Yeah. It didn't get much better from there. I don't want to do that again. He forgave me, though. Yeah. It was rough.
Thank you. Stephen G. Kellman is a professor of comparative literature at the University of Texas at San Antonio, where he's taught since 1976. He's the author of The Restless Iran Starvins, Outside on the Inside, The Translingual Imagination, Loving Reading, Erotics of the Text, and Redemption, The Life of Henry Roth, which received the New York Society Library Award for biography. As well as hundreds of essays and more than 1,000 reviews. His latest collection of essays is entitled Rambling Prose. Among his other honors are the Gemini Inc. Literary Excellence Award and the San Antonio Public Library Foundation's Arts and Letters Award. In Rambling Prose, he explores such topics as animal rights, silence, mortality, eroticism, film and language with its unique critical perspective. And it's not on his bio, but I have to say that for about 10 years, Steve was a columnist for the San Antonio Light. And before I ever thought I might want to be a journalist or a columnist, I would read his column, and it showed me that a newspaper column could be an essay. And I don't know if I've ever thanked Steve for that inspiration, but I thank him now. Steve.
Thank you, Cary, for that generous introduction, and it's an honor to be here with you and with Rick Bass. This book, Rambling Prose, collects some of my essays from more than 30 years. Let me read one of the shorter ones that was first published in 2010 in the Southwest Review. It's called Kafka's Plea. One day during lunch break at the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute in Prague, a colleague offered to share a slice of sausage with Franz Kafka. A strict vegetarian, Kafka is said to have replied, "The only fit food for a man is half a lemon." Nutritionists would probably disagree. However, in The Hunger Artist, the story of a performer who declines even a piece of lemon, a virtuoso of abstemiousness who flaunts his ability to fast for weeks and months, Kafka elevates refusing to eat into a principle of aesthetics. A rich tradition exists of literature, film, and painting that celebrate la joie de table, the conviviality of convivium, shared delight in pleasures of the palate. However, there is also a counter-tradition, a line of renegade artists who refuse to eat their peas, who defy proper dining etiquette through displays of anorexia, bulimia, cannibalism, coprophagy, necrophagia, veganism, starvation, and other culinary aberrations. Modernism arose as an adversarial impulse, a challenge to bourgeois conventions. It often manifested itself in bad table manners. If ritualized ingestion is the most formalized sacrament of the Western middle class, a secular form of the Eucharist, then artists who reject the prefix menu assert their claim to the avant-garde. At the risk of sounding like Cary Nation at a beer bust, I offer food for thought about aberrant thoughts on eating. Sigmund Freud's theory of sublimation explains artistic ambition by recourse to a diverted libido. But Francois Rabelais locates the impulse for art not in the groin, but squarely in the stomach. In the fourth book of the heroic deeds and sayings of the noble Pantagruel, he writes, Sir Belly is the true master of all the arts. To this chivalrous monarch, we are all bound to show reverence, swear obedience, and give honor. And much literature, painting, and film, functioning as a toast to pain grillé and more sumptuous fare, does just that. Food, quipped Fran Lebowitz, is an important part of a balanced diet. It is also an essential ingredient in the Odyssey and Beowulf, as well as in Search of Lost Time and To the Light. It is celebrated in what is now a familiar canon of culinary films, including Tampopo, Like Water for Chocolate, The Wedding Banquet, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, Big Night, Chocolat, Babette's Feast, Ratatouille, Julie and Julia, Eat, Pray, Love, Chef, and The 100-Foot Journey. Of course, moviegoing, a pretext for popcorn chomping, has long been an oral experience, and exhibitors find concession stands a more lucrative profit center than their box offices. Visual artists, from the cave painters paying tribute to their prey, to Leonardo with his Last Supper, to Judy Chicago and the Dinner Party, have honored the human appetite. Please, sir, I want some more, pleads Oliver Twist, and no reader would begrudge the hungry orphan another bowl of gruel. However, when Louis Buñuel wanted to mock middle-class values, he often struck at the stomach. The Exterminating Angel is the story of a formal dinner party that, far from being an occasion for savoring sumptuous dishes and stimulating company, proves to be a prison. Its guests find themselves unaccountably trapped for weeks inside an elegant dining room. And the running joke in Buñuel's The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie is that its privileged characters are thwarted every time they begin to share a meal. The film dramatizes the frustrations of what in Latin would be termed victus interruptus, an impeded repast. As exposés of the food industry and the unhealthy eating habits of contemporary Americans, both Super Size Me and Fast Food Nation are appetite suppressants, antidotes to the gastronomic gusto of Babette's Feast. So too is Marco Ferreri's 1973 film, La Grande Bouffe, in which four wealthy gentlemen gather at a country estate for the purpose of gorging themselves in splendid style to death. If I were managing one of those fashionable theaters that serves meals to its audiences, I don't think that I would want to program La Grande Bouffe into my schedule. Similarly, films that depict the consumption of human flesh challenge the conventions of feasting our eyes on images of joyous consumption. Soylent Green, Eating Raoul, The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, Fried Green Tomatoes, The Silence of the Lambs, Alive, and Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, like any number of exploitative horror flicks involving dismemberment and ingestion of human bodies, do not encourage party appetites. The texts of the Marquis de Sade delight in defying many taboos, particularly in regard to food. While writing the 120 Days of Sodom, de Sade's body was ballooning into grotesque proportions, but few who read his depictions of coprophagy and cannibalism are likely to want to snack while turning the gruesome pages. The very thought of eating human flesh induces revulsion in most readers, but some, recognizing the continuity of life, refuse to privilege Homo sapiens as uniquely capable of suffering. For them, it is morally repugnant to inflict unnecessary pain or death on anyone, and it is therefore inconsistent to refrain from eating slices of a fellow human being while continuing to consume what society calls meat, and what Ingrid Newkirk, president of PETA, defines as, quote, the antibiotic and pesticide-laden corpse of a tortured animal. Anyone squeamish about seeing Sweeney Todd might also consider the suffering source of the boeuf en daube that Mrs. Ramsay revels in To the Lighthouse. As an alternative to the butchery inherent in conventional diets, vegetarianism has a long and noble history. According to Genesis, Adam and Eve never needed flesh and blood to sustain them in the Garden of Eden, and Ovid, like Raphael in Milton's Paradise Lost, imagined a golden age in which butchery is not a precondition for nutrition. Ambrosia and nectar were sustenance enough for the Greek gods, and in the Homeric hymn to Hermes, the messenger of Mount Olympus resists the temptation to feast on meat, lest it make him mortal. Though it is moot whether Socrates and Plato themselves partook of meat at the banquets they attended, the ideal state imagined in the Republic is a vegetopia. Many other ancient writers, including Empedocles, Plotinus, Plutarch, Porphyry, Seneca, and Theophrastus, fixed their canons and appetites against slaughter. And the original Epicurean, Epicurus himself, found pleasure in foregoing flesh. More recent literary vegetarians have included Percy Bysshe Shelley, Leo Tolstoy, George Bernard Shaw, Ted Hughes, V.S. Naipaul, J.M. Coetzee, Margaret Atwood, and Jonathan Safran Foer. For the animals, wrote Isaac Bashevis, Singer, who also abstained from meat, it is an eternal Treblinka. However, almost as long as the history of vegetarianism is the history of anti-vegetarian bigotry. Those who lunch on sausage are often dyspeptic toward those who opt for half a lemon. Don't artichokes have hearts, they ask? If you're willing to step on an ant, they sneer, why not toss a living lobster into a boiling pot? In his 2002 book, Kill It and Grill It, Ted and Shemaine Nugent's Guide to Preparing and Cooking Wild Game and Fish, hard rocker and bow hunter Ted Nugent scoffs. Vegetarians are cool. All I eat are vegetarians, except for the occasion mountain lion steak. No one ever went broke by taunting vegetarians. In her best-selling memoir, Going Rogue, An American Life, Sarah Palin, a former beauty queen intent on showing up the guys, prides herself on her prowess at hunting and butchering. I love meat, she proclaims. I eat pork chops, thick bacon burgers, and the seared, fatty edges of a medium well-done steak. But I especially love moose and caribou. I always remind people from outside our state that there's plenty of room for all Alaska's animals, right next to the mashed potatoes. And the quondam governor scoffs at those who do not share her craving for animal flesh. Quote, If any vegans come over for dinner, I could whip them up a salad, then explain my philosophy on being a carnivore. If God had not intended for us to eat animals, how come he made them out of meat? Ridicule is the tribute that carnivores pay to Pythagoreans. The defensiveness of rabid meat eaters reflects anxiety over their own alimentary preferences.
Thank you, Stephen. I am eating carrots and peas after this, man. I am staying away from. But thank you very much, and thank you, Rick. And we already have a couple of questions coming up already, but I wanted to first just talk with y'all, ask you a couple of things about the essay as a genre, as an art form, and in both of y'all's introductions to your books, Rick more metaphorically, Stephen more directly, you almost describe what an essay is. Rick, in explaining why you live in Montana, you say, I chose a place where there was more space and in the bounty of public land, fewer boundaries and fences. And Stephen, even writing about the diverse subject matter in your book, you wrote, like the Rambling Rose, I'll play off on your book's title, like the Rambling Rose, a shrub that spreads over fences, trees, and other subjects it encounters. This volume sprouts blossoms along the way. That describes essays, few boundaries and fences, and just kind of overflows, but there are blossoms. What is it about, and both of you are prolific in other genres, but what is it about the essay that you like? And start with Rick.
Yeah, I'm pausing with the last part of the question. I'm not sure I like it. When you said what part of the essay you like, but yeah, I don't know if I like it or not. I don't know why I choose that genre for some stories and fiction or reportage for another story. I don't have an answer to it. Yeah, I think the closest I can come is what you are identifying, Cary, that there is some space and a feeling, at least a perception, that you're a little less bound by orthodoxy or boundaries in an essay. It's yours, so you can do with it what you want. You're sharing it with the reader, and they can take it or leave it. It's not like I don't know, like a short story is kind of a precious gift. You know, it's got to be interesting, and I mean everything's got to be interesting. But short stories got a little, I think, just a different vibe to it. And essay is really comfortable to me. I guess that's a long way of saying if that's what I like best about an essay, it's comfort and ease of access.
I find the essay,
Stephen, go ahead.
I find the essay both appealing and intimidating because it is a catch-all for everything. It is at the same time the most humbling and the most arrogant of literary forms, it seems to me. It is humble because it derives, etymologically, the word essay comes from the French essayer, to attempt. And an essay is an attempt. It is a groping. It is a series of questions rather than answers. And it's a recognition that we don't have the final answer. But it is also, I think, the most egotistical of forms, perhaps, in that there's always the self lurking there. It's hard to escape personal responsibility for those thoughts that you, the writer, put on paper. In a way that perhaps, writing a short story, you can. You can put it in the mouth of a narrator, create a persona. It's much harder to do that in an essay. So I find the tension between pride and humility, between ego and self-effacement, one of the appeals of the essay form.
that's well, that kind of leads into my next question, because I think I agree. The thing about that can really make for a poor essayist and turn the reader off is if the essay is there's no doubt in what he or she is writing. It can really come across as self-indulgent. There's no questioning of the writer himself or herself. So that leads to, I guess, to tone. Whether for the essay or any kind of writing, but especially for the essay, what is the difference between voice and style and tone? And I'm thinking, and just based on what going off of your answer, Stephen, that what pulls an essay off for the essayist is the tone, how the tone is. But what is the difference? Because people think that voice and style are the same. I don't think so. But what do the two of you think? And we'll start with Stephen.
I'm not sure I understand the distinction you're drawing. It seems to me that voice and tone are embodiments of style. The style is the writer, and the writer manifests him or herself through choice of words. Choice of words determines the tone and the voice. So I find it very hard to separate those.
Okay. Rick?
Yeah, no, there. This is tough panel. Like, you know, when I sit down to write, I don't think about this stuff. I think I try and let the subject pull or call what those decisions that you're asking about, Cary. But I think maybe voice is how you say it, and tone is how you feel about it, and style are just the techniques that you draw from to present the story to the reader. You know, it could be structural choices, it could be rhythm and meter, it's like Stephen's saying, it's a lot of things, but yeah, voice is how you decide to say it, and tone is how you do it.
Let me ask it this way: when you decide upon a particular topic for an essay, and you know, it could be an essay, it could be a review, a literary essay, but does the topic itself determine the tone? And maybe that's what I'm getting at. That to me, the voice is actually who the writer is. Like, in other words, all of us are influenced by other writers and try to imitate them at one point. To me, that's kind of like you were trying to imitate their style of writing, but eventually it's our voice that comes through. Whereas with tone is determined by what is particular that we're writing about. So I'm thinking, for instance, Rick, of the tone of the essay on your cousin. I mean, that's a different. I mean, your cousin who passed away, that's a different tone for an essay that you write about the fishing trip with your father. So I guess that's where the distinction I was making with voice and style and tone. But let me go to a question from the audience. What advice do you have for writers who are stuck in a creative rut? Rick?
I mean, I want to be smart aleck and say work harder, but that just digs the rut deeper. Yeah, rut's bad. I mean, there's little tricks that writers like to attempt in such situations. Read more, walk more. At the end of the day, I think writing is such an act of courage, and because you are going to suck most of the time, and you just have to think of it as showing up at the gym and putting in the hours to get in shape, to be fit for the time when you're not in a rut. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little time off, but it sounds by the questioner that the tone of the question that this might be more than 3 or 4 days. It might be a month or two, and you have to get hard with yourself. You have to. The great short story writer Barry Hannah said a student gave him a paper, and he just wrote at the top, "This isn't interesting," and then he didn't put any other comments on the entire manuscript. And the student came at the end of class, tossed it, kind of slid it across the desk at him, and said, "Tell me how to make it be interesting. That's your job." And he looked at the student and he said, "Try making yourself be a more interesting person." And it's like, what a brutal piece of advice. I mean, I would have wilted or burst into flames or something, but as direct and combative as it was, it's also, yeah, you've got, at the end of the day, the story doesn't care if you're in a rut or not. You've got to get out. Yeah, rut's a bad place to be. Even, yeah.
Cary, you mentioned earlier another book that I wrote called Redemption, which is a biography of the American novelist Henry Roth. Henry Roth is perhaps notable for having the longest writer's block of any major figure in American literary history.
Yeah.
He published his first novel, Call It Sleep, in 1934, and he published his second novel, Mercy of a Rude Stream, in 1994. 60 years is quite a long period for a writer's block. And it was only the imminence of death that snapped him out of his writer's block. Maybe we all ought to think a little bit more of how brief life is and what we can do while we're still here. And that, the imminence of death can intensify the mind. I'd also suggest taking a good walk, getting some fresh air, thinking of other things, putting away your manuscript for a few days, coming back to it with fresh eyes.
That's also one of the the excellent essays in the book, Literary Silences.
Yes.
And kind of the complementing that essay was the essay that you did about the artists who did produce significant work late in life, but your point being just now is that those years aren't guaranteed. So if you've got something to do, you better get the work done. Another question, and it's kind of related to the first question. That's by the same person. What hobbies, practices have you picked up during the pandemic that have helped enrich your writing? Stephen?
I'm not sure I have.
Yeah.
I mean, the pandemic really has simply intensified for many of us who are writers. I mean, what we do is we go into a corner by ourselves and we read and we write and we revise and revise and revise. And not being able to go out as much and mingle with other people simply extends our usual practice and perhaps makes it easier and more socially acceptable.
Rick?
It's a difficult, it's an easy question. It's a difficult answer. I think something I have learned from the pandemic is a bit more within myself, more urgency. I mean, the rage that and despair that I felt at the previous administration's I don't know what the word is, refusal to witness, much less speak the truth. What am I going to do with that? Well, I'll tell you one thing I don't want to do with it is talk in those kinds of terms, because everybody recoils and it's like soapbox rhetoric. And so the great painter, landscape painter Russell Chatham said that when society is insane, the artist must offer sanity. And when there's to move in counter response to the direction that things are going, and exploit that unutilized territory. And so all that to say, the lunacy of our country's lack of response to the pandemic forced me to be patient in my prose and try and write images of, distilled into beauty and meaning, as opposed to the great ugliness and lack of meaning that I saw whenever I looked up from the shelter.
When do you know that a piece is finished? I mean, one of the drawbacks of an essay would be the fact that the lack of boundaries, and that and the detours it can take, and it can be so inclusive. At what point do you, as a writer, know that a particular essay that you're working on is done, that there's nothing more that I can do, or anything more that I add might take away from the effect?
In a sense,
Whoever wants to go first.
In a sense, a writer never knows about the completeness of his or her own work. I guess, if you're writing a sonnet and you've written the couplet, it's over. If you're using a fixed form like a villanelle, you know that you have completed it. If you've come up with a catchy final line to your novel, maybe you're finished. But to the extent that an essay is an attempt, it is never complete. And as I was putting together my collection, going back over essays that I've written, it's very easy to second guess myself 25 years ago, how I might have written the work differently, how I might have added to it, what else one might say in the post-Trump era about thoughts that I had in the pre-Trump era, for example. To the extent I think that we're still alive and still thinking, essays are living creatures as well, and they invite our imaginations to expand on them.
Great.
Yeah, I think really echo what Steve's saying. I think at the end of an essay or even a story, for me there's a feeling or quality of stillness where, okay, that's where the thing was trying to get, and it found its place. What Wallace Stegner called the angle of repose, or geologists called angle of repose, the place where the thing that's tumbling downhill finally finds the intersection of gravity and slope where it stops. It's up to the essay. It's up to all that came before it. Again, the rhythm, the structure. It's just the place where the water drops over, the falls into the eddy below, the stillness below. I like to read essays that have a turn at the end. I don't mean a surprise or a twist, but just a turn toward, I guess, a lightness of being that this maddening to talk about art, in person or on Zoom with all these abstractions. I mean, but a transcendence to it, or a lift up where, I didn't think of it that way. Like metaphor, you're showing how two things thought to be previously unalike are actually alike in some ways, or vice versa. Two things that you thought previously were alike are shown to be unalike in ways you hadn't realized, and that's cool. That's always a good landing point for an essay or a story. But then to go one more turn beyond that, and some truth that you didn't even know you were looking for at the end of the essay. That's what I like best, when that kind of surprise, but not the O. Henry surprise, but that the artistic surprise. Like, oh shit, I thought this was an essay about that, and I realize now it's about this. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. One of the questions we have is, what are your favorite craft of writing books? I would also ask along with that, beyond that, I mean, if you have an answer for that, of course, what are your favorite craft of writing books? But who are some of the writers, what are some of the books that have inspired and sustained you over the years? Rick?
No one who.
Oh, Stephen, go ahead. Here.
No one who admires the form of the essay can ignore Montaigne, the great pioneer of the form and master of it. One essay that I keep going back and forcing on my students, because not only is it magnificently written, but its subject matter is writing and reading. And that's an essay by George Orwell called Politics and the English Language, about how language shapes thought, how clear writing can only be the product of clear thinking. And that's something that we should strive for. Another essayist that I go back again and again to is Susan Sontag. And I think particularly of an essay of hers called Against Interpretation, which in a way is runs counter to what she is doing. She is arguing against at least a certain kind of academic interpretation, calling for a kind of pleasure, a joy in reading that a certain kind of sterile analysis deprives us of. I guess my background in literary criticism drew me initially to the great literary critics like Edmund Wilson or Leslie Fiedler or Lionel Trilling, Alfred Kazin. What I like most about the best of those is a style that maybe we could call lapidary, a style that is totally economical. There is no fat in it. You can isolate individual sentences and mull over them for ages.
Thanks. Great answer. Thank you. Rick?
A lovely craft book is Eudora Welty's One Writer's Beginnings. It's more novelistic in story, but it's a great memoir about her path into writing. Has a lot to say about the writing life. Speaking of which, there's a great memoir by the essayist Annie Dillard. I think it's called the Writing Life. She's one of my favorite essayists. What she does in essays is just delightful, or whatever is beyond delightful, rapturous. And a lot of the natural history writers, Doug Peacock and Terry Tippus Williams, come to mind. I think because they traffic in the five senses, just by virtue of being, often writing about being out in the world, touching, tasting, smelling, seeing, hearing it. That helps ground me. I mean, that great Carlos William maxim, no ideas but in things. I think that's important for writers these days to reconsider or consider. I think as Stephen and you, Cary, also intimated early in this conversation, there can be real danger in the essay, and there can be arrogance and indulgence, and I think the greatest threat to any piece of writing is too much abstraction. I mean, the abstract is going to mean a different thing to a different person, different reader. You start stacking 2 abstractions, 3 abstractions, 4 deep into a sentence. Rarely is the reader going to get to the same place that the writer wanted him or her to reach with that level of interpretation.
Rick, I think of Montaigne's personal motto, which in French was "Que sais-je?" What do I know? And the implicit answer was not a hell of a lot. And I think if you begin with that acknowledgement, maybe you can begin to write an essay.
Montaigne, go ahead, Rick.
The question implies hunger and curiosity.
And because he retires, before he's 40, to his Montaigne, the father of the essay, he retires to his tower on his lavish estate, which is where he does his writing. So I was going to ask each of you, is that like where you write? Do you have a tall tower on a lavish estate that you spend the night thinking and writing? If not, where do you write and how do you write? Do you do it on Notepad? Do you start off with a computer?
I actually am in a tower. We built something over our garage, and that's where my study is. and that's where I write. And I do my writing on a computer. Our estate is not quite like Montaigne's. I do work for a living, teaching at a university. So I do not have quite the life of elegant privilege, but it is a life of privilege compared to that. I think of most people on the planet. It is a privilege to be able to write. There are many people who have thoughts to express and don't have the opportunity to do that. And I very much appreciate having that opportunity.
Great answer. Rick?
I was tempted to say I write in a basement so that we balance the. Yeah, kind of what Stephen was saying earlier about you get later into the game and I'll write anywhere that there's a desk and a chair. I do like to write in the morning. I like to write by hand in a spiral notebook. When the weather's good, I like to write outside at this picnic table out by my cabin. But when it's not good, I go inside and the rain or snow is hitting the tin roof and sliding down, and got a fire in the wood stove, and it's whatever facilitates the descent into the dream of the story. Regularity and predictability is critical to that. I think the great writer William Maxwell said that his ideal writing conditions were for him to be in his library, in his study at home with his children playing several rooms away, and he could hear them and know they were there, and the door would be slightly open, but they wouldn't come anywhere near him, and it would just be kind of in between those two worlds of the dream and yet the attachment of the regular life.
Thank you. We're getting near the end of the hour, but I did want this little conversation to really be helpful to folks out there who are watching. And going back to what Stephen just said about the privilege of being able to write for a living, what would you say to folks? And this is not the same as someone who's in a creative rut who may just may need to take a walk or sit down and do the work. What do you say to those people who want to write but don't consider themselves writers, who have something to say but don't believe that they have the talent or the platform to say it? And this may end up being the last question of the session.
There are more and more platforms available. The age of the internet, the electronic age, has multiplied the number of venues in which writing becomes available. It's true that the major publishers have consolidated. They're getting even more consolidated now to 4 big American publishing houses. But the number of independent presses has multiplied enormously. I think if you want to write, and you have to want to write, it's not an easy calling. It's not just sitting and expecting inspiration to come and that you will immediately create the great American novel. It's as much rewriting as writing, and persistence. A friend of mine who's a novelist had one of his manuscripts turned down 40 times before it became a major bestseller. So persistence in the writing and persistence in the marketing is the only way to go.
Thanks, Stephen. Rick?
Yeah, everybody has a story to tell, but again, echoing Steve's comments, you need to pick one that you really want to tell, something that will be lost if you don't tell it. The great editor, Tom Jinks, says, "What has loosed their tongues, the characters' tongues, at the beginning of any story?" You don't have to go to school to learn it. There have been some really great writers who have self-taught, taught themselves, writing workshops. Just jump into a weekend boot camp and you'll pick up a lot. You'll save yourself years of miscues and stumbles that just through writing is not that complicated. It's just real hard.
Well, thank y'all both very much. Wish we had more time. I wish maybe one day we can do this in person. I do want to encourage everyone out there to not just get these two, the latest books of theirs, the latest collections, but any of their work that you can find, and go to the No Borders bookstore and for their works and all the writers who have been a part of this 3-day festival, this celebration of books, reading and writing. Stephen and Rick, I said in my email last week, I've read both of y'all for years, and admire you so much, and learn from you. Thank you very much for being with us this evening, this afternoon. And to everyone out there, thank you for joining in. Be safe, be careful, have a pleasant weekend, and keep reading and keep writing. Take care.
Thank you, Cary. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Rick. Cary, you're a perfectly gracious host. Thank you for all of this.
You're too kind. Thank you so much.